4-4, this is 7, stand by a minute. Just come on, what is your attack angle?
Okay, talk to him, see what that did.
Charlie Horse, Sandy 8.
2-4, traffic 275.
Sandy 5 just made a pass in there. Can you give us any?
Go 2-1, Sandy 7.
Roger, sir. Be advised we have John agrees 2-1 and 6-6 standing by over.
Okay, I'll put it a little closer than those trees. Let me come around with a loud 3 and I'll put it on those trees there.
Roger that, loud 3.
So let's go to your third mission we were discussing.
Well, the third mission's one that I think you've talked, Rich, to other people about, was the famous Nail 3-1 Alpha and Bravo, and that was an OV-10 nail FAC, so front seater and back seater, from NKP that got shot down in central Laos in a river spot that we call the Catcher's Mitt, and if you see it on a map, it looks exactly like a catcher's mitt with a thumb, and then and these guys get shot down. And so I'm having a nice relaxed day off, working with the wing commander in his office, and he says, oh, we got a OV-10 down, and so I go with him to the command post. Well, the first Sandys and Jollies go out, and Mike Foss, who's the lead Sandy, is making a low pass trying to figure out where the survivors are, and the gun shoots him down. And Mike was able to glide going back west. This is only 60 miles from NKP. It's in Laos, but it's not far from home. Mike manages to glide a few miles and then uses the Yankee system and extracts. And an Air America Huey picks him up before the Jolly's there. The Jolly can't get there as fast so Mike's on his way home with our friends from Air America. And the next set of Jollies, or next set of Sandys, Don Milner is the lead, and he takes a round from this 37 millimeter gun that puts over 100 holes in the back of his airplane. And I've got a great picture taken on the ground of it. He flew it back and landed. But by this time, we've got the third Sandys out there, and this gun has now shot down 2 airplanes and severely damaged the third one. And the squadron commander says, as we're in the command post, we need a smoke flight, which was a flight loaded wall-to-wall with white phosphorus bombs and CBU canisters. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking around, and I said, I volunteer, I'll lead the smoke flight. And my squadron commander, Marty Barbina, says, you'll need a wingman. And I turned and looked at the wing commander, Jack Robinson, who had 2 or 3 MiG kills in Korea, who had an A1 tour as a major, was now the wing commander on his second A1 tour. And I said, sir, and he said, absolutely. And so I've now got the best wingman in the world. I've got my wing commander. And so we hustle out, they get the airplanes loaded, we get in the airplane, and the first thing that happens is we take off, and remember, we're not going very far. I get up and level off, and I reach up to pull the prop speed lever back, and it just flops in my hand. It's not connected to anything. And so the prop is at full takeoff RPM, 3,600 RPM, which is fine. The airplane, that's the way you take off and land. But I obviously can't go and burn gas like that. I mean, I would run out of gas like this. So I say, hey, I've got to turn around and go back. Well, now I've got to land a fully loaded A1 with fuel and all this ordnance and not get hot brakes and not close the runway by taking the barrier. So I rolled all 8,000 feet before I got slowed down, taxied in, shut the engine off. Meanwhile, Colonel Robinson's on his way to the SAR. I said, boss, you just go on down, I'll meet you. Crew chief opens up the panel on the side, looks, reaches down in his box and pulls out about a 2-inch long cotter pin, which I was very familiar with from my auto mechanic days, and holds it up to me and goes like this, and I go, yeah. So it's linkage, and he puts the cotter pin in the linkage, and he looks at me and he says, check, and I go like this, and he closes it down. Meanwhile, smartly, the crew chief has pulled the fuel truck up and topped me back off because I used some gas, taking off and coming back around. So I go off, take off again. So I'm 15 minutes behind Colonel Robinson. We get down there, and what I realize very quickly is that we know where the gun is relative to these two guys. These two survivors on the ground are great because these guys are facts, and they're listening to this gun shoot, and they basically know the exact heading from where they are to where the gun is, and it was just a matter of figuring out where it was. Well, it occurred to me that if you brought the helicopter in from the gun was about a mile or a mile and a quarter north of the survivors. And we knew pretty much where it was. But we didn't want to go have a fight with the gun. But it occurred to me, if you're flying a Jolly Green and you're coming in along the treetops, and this wasn't heavy jungle canopy, this was lighter, I would call it forest kind of, lower trees. If he just flew along and drug his landing gear along the top of the trees, he could pull right up, pick the two survivors up, turn around and go out, and the gun would never see him. The gun couldn't, his angle of deflection, he couldn't see the guy, let alone shoot at him. So we brief, and I know I've got a good young Captain Low Jolly pilot out there that I'm very comfortable with. So I give the briefing, and I said, now, understand, I don't want you ever to get more than 20 feet above the top of the trees, and you're going to be safe. So Colonel Robinson and I dropped the one and only full smoke corridor that I'd ever seen. I mean, we'd brief this and practice it, but he and I we're the smoke, so we're dropping the smoke. It was perfect. It was like we went out and set up a wall. And so here's this corridor, and the gun's on down that way, and the sun is almost to set. It's almost dark, so we got to get this going. So what I didn't say was when the last Sandys that were there when Colonel Robinson and I first got there, when the Sandy on-scene commander, when they ran out of gas, whoever that was, and I don't even remember now, realized that I was the on-scene Sandy qualified flight lead who had been sitting there watching the whole thing for 2 hours, where the other Sandys that had just gotten there had come from Da Nang and Ubon, and they didn't have any idea what was going on. And he said, okay, Smoke was my call sign. Yeah. He said, Smoke 44 is now the on-scene commander. So it was unusual that somebody with a call sign other than Sandy was now the on-scene commander, but to the hobo squadron guys, it was that's Randy. Yeah. Randy's a Sandy lead. This is what we ought to do. So we brief this, and we're 4A1s in our daisy chain, trying to get this guy to shoot and making sure that, and we were flying so that we flew behind him when we went to where he was. So if he was going to shoot at us, he had to turn around and point completely away, and we would, you're drawing fire. We were trying to tempt him. Guy never flew. I'm sure they were listening on the radio. Never fired a shot at this point. We look up, and as the sun is setting, and it's dusk, here's this Jolly Green 600 feet up in the air. And I start screaming at the Jolly, get down, and he doesn't. And I said, abort, brake, 180, go. He doesn't do anything, and at this point, the gun shoots at him. And I'm in a position west of the north gun, the south survivors, and I'm at a position where it looked to me like, in the dark, with this clip of 37 millimeter, which has got tracers. Yeah. It looked to me like the tracers went through the rotor path of the helicopter. That's how close but he missed him. And of course, the minute the guy shot, this helicopter turns, and I am just flabbergasted. What on earth happened? What happened to the briefing, the drag your landing gear along the tree? And of course, Colonel Robinson, who's, my wingman, is watching this whole thing. And as we call it off, tell the survivors, because now it's dark, tell the survivors we'll come back and get them in the morning. Colonel Robinson says to me on the FM radio, Randy, don't talk to the Jollies until I do. And I could tell by the tone of his voice that he was furious. I mean, he's not mad at me. He's just furious about what just happened. So here's the punchline. We get back to NKP. We both go over to the Jollies, or they come to the command post. And the young captain tells us what happened. There was a lieutenant colonel who had been the commander of the Jolly Squadron at NKP who had been fired as the commander. And he had been sent to Saigon to the rescue headquarters where he was sitting behind a desk, and he'd been doing that for 4 or 5 months. And I knew the guy because he was there when I first got to NKP. He had come up to NKP to fly his 1 mission a month so that he got his combat pay. He had bumped the other captain who was the high Jolly without any of us knowing it. So when Mike Foss went down to start the SAR, he thought he had the 2 captains that he had briefed with that morning as the 2 Jollies, and instead he had the captain as the low Jolly and this lieutenant colonel from Saigon as the high Jolly. What this guy did is he ordered the captain to change places with him to do the pickup.
Oh, no.
And the captain didn't say anything to us on the radio, which I later, without yelling at the guy, said, look, from an integrity standpoint, you should have called me and said, I'm no longer the low Jolly, and then I would have taken care, of the rest of that. But anyway, Colonel Robinson was so livid that guy was on the C-130 back to Saigon within an hour, and to my understanding, never flew another combat mission. But the next morning, when the Sandys went back, John Lackey was the on-scene commander, and they'd moved more guns in. Okay. So John and I didn't fly that day, but John and the other 3 Sandys took like 3 hours to make it safe enough, and then John ran the Jolly in exactly the way we had briefed it, and picked the 2 guys up, and it came back to NKP. But it was one of those things where, in my mind, what could I have done different? Nothing, absolutely nothing. What do I wish had happened? I wish the Captain Jolly had said, smoke 4-4. I'm not the low Jolly anymore.
It's not like you had time to see what they were doing.
No, they're out there out of sight, and see, that conversation they had took place on a frequency where my 2 other Sandys, they couldn't hear it either, so they didn't know what happened. They just all of a sudden see the guy, start the run in the way we briefed it. But it was one of those things that would have been an absolute tragedy if those guys had gotten captured or killed that night. Mm-hmm. Instead of being picked up, because we had them picked up.
Or if that Jolly had taken hits and caused
issues.
Then you've got how many
yeah,
crew
5, yeah.
So you would have had 7 on the ground if you were lucky.
Exactly. Exactly.
That could have been absolutely.
So Nail 3-1 Alpha and Bravo was not my favorite mission, but it had a good ending.
Well, I can see where that is, but it's all the contributing factors, and thank goodness you guys had come up with a great plan.
Yeah.
And adhered to that.
Yeah.
But the thought of more guns coming into the area, the Vietnamese loved baited traps.
Oh, absolutely. And people would say, you Sandys are so brave because you go down there and troll at 300 feet, and I would say, we're not as brave as you think, because most of the time those guys were too smart to shoot at us. Mm-hmm. Because if they shot at us, we knew where we were. We'd come back and shoot at them, and they wanted to shoot at the helicopter. They weren't after A1s. They were after Jolly Greens.
Take 1. Fast movers in the